Tomorrow we're leaving, Mom. I've sold your beach house. Those words, coming from the mouth of my own daughter, the one I had cradled in my arms, the one whose tears I had wiped, the one I had sung to sleep, cut through my heart like a cold, merciless blade. In that very instant, everything I had trusted, every cherished memory, shattered into fragments. But what Angela and Edward didn't know was that they had gravely underestimated this mother. They thought I was weak, that I would bow before their ambition and deceit. They were wrong. Dead wrong. Within the next 24 hours, everything they thought belonged to them would return, piece by piece. I would not only reclaim what was lost, the beach house, my husband's truck, the money, but I would awaken a force they had never known I possessed. This is not merely a story about wealth. It is about power, betrayal, and the lesson a mother imparts to her children.
Watch closely and witness how a woman who seemed abandoned turns her pain into a weapon, compelling even the most confident to bow before the unyielding strength of resolve. Tomorrow it all started with a phone call. The phone rang in the quiet afternoon. Sunlight slanted through the curtains, casting pale bands across the worn wooden floor I had scrubbed so many times that every scratch felt like part of my memory. I did not hesitate when I picked up. The voice on the line was smooth but cold, and it made the hairs on my neck stand up. Tomorrow we're leaving, Mom. I've sold your beach house, and Dad's truck, too. I stood frozen. Those words, short, full of betrayal, drove straight into my heart like a cold blade. The beach house, the place Robert and I had spent whole summers, where the children's laughter rang out every afternoon, where sweat and tears had mixed to build those solid walls, had slipped into someone else's hands without my knowledge. And the old truck Robert had lovingly repaired himself, the one that had carried us along sunlit coastal roads, was gone as well. I drew a deep breath, forcing the tremor from my hands. Angela, my daughter, the one I had once sung to sleep, wiped tears from when she was afraid of the dark, had become an enemy. And Edward, whom I had trusted, my second son whose wounds I had stitched with my own hands, now stood on the side of betrayal. They thought I would soften, that I was weak, that an old mother could only weep and beg. They were wrong. When I hung up, despair did not take me. Something else did, a cold current that ran through my spine, awakening the deepest part of me I had believed sleeping, alertness, and a plan for revenge. I remembered the envelope Robert had left before he died, carefully hidden in the old desk drawer. An envelope that, when opened, would reveal not only the truth about hidden assets, but also grant a power Angela and Edward could never have imagined. Robert had always been discreet, but he knew how to protect his family in his own way. I once thought what he left behind were only memories, photos, hastily written letters, but now I realize he had prepared a weapon for me. A weapon with which to face the very children I had loved enough to sacrifice myself for. I stood in the living room and looked out the window. The sea breeze drifted in, carrying the salty scent of the water. The waves' murmury reminded me of the past, of happy days, of sunlit afternoons on the sand that I was about to lose. But instead of pain, another feeling rose within me, determination and a plan. If they thought I would bow, they would soon learn that this mother was never as simple as she appeared. I opened the drawer. My hand touched the old envelope. The paper was creased, the ink faded, but the contents inside were more alive than ever. Robert had left instructions, details of each house, each share, each contract, all enough that I could not only reclaim what had been stolen, but surpass anything Angela and Edward had ever dreamed of. A cold smile touched my lips. I did not need to shout, nor to rage. This plan would not be a noisy storm, but a quiet, certain revenge, step by step, forcing the most confident to bow their heads. I would play a game they knew nothing about, and that game would begin from this very moment, the second I held the envelope in my hand. Angela and Edward were mistaken. They had turned a mother who seemed weak into an unpredictable adversary. They would learn that a mother's love can not only nurture, but also become the power of revenge. And I, Antonia, the abandoned mother, was about to awaken the full force Robert had left me, the power my two children, in their ambition and deceit, had never even imagined.
Below is a detailed, faithful English translation that preserves the original's mysterious, revengeful, family-centered, and deeply emotional narrative voice. When I hung up, my hands still trembling, I did not run to sob or scream like a betrayed mother. Instead, I turned back to the desk, my gaze hollow as it fell on the envelope Robert had left. The envelope I had once assumed contained nothing more than a few scraps of paper, a few faded signatures. But now I understood that Robert never left anything to chance. He had prepared a gift for me, or rather, a weapon. I gently tore the envelope open. The sound of tearing paper echoed like my racing heartbeat, and in that moment, my sense of betrayal seemed to dissolve, giving way to something else. Curiosity, tension, and a quiet, furtive hope. I drew out the sheets and my eyes widened, pupils contracting with shock.
On those pages, every word and every number appeared like a treasure map. Assets, shares, contracts, companies, everything listed under my name, though I had never known. I, Antonia, the mother Angela and Edward thought weak and poor, was in fact the owner of an empire they had never imagined. Millions of dollars, houses across the state, shares in large companies Robert had quietly invested in, now lay in my hands. Each figure, each signature, engraved a power I had never recognized. I sat down, my heart pounding, my mind reeling. How could I believe that all I had thought was a poor past, the years I had paid bills and put meals on the table with my own hands, had been hiding such enormous power? Robert had always been discreet, but now I understood. He had prepared me not merely to live, but to take revenge, should the day come when I was betrayed.
The papers seemed to dance before my eyes, revealing secrets of a life I had never known. An apartment in Manhattan, the coastal plot that Angela had just sold, the shrewd investments Edward once bragged about to his friends. Now, all under my control. I had thought what I possessed came from labor or luck, but now I realized it was all Robert's quiet plan. A plan so I would awaken at the right moment. A cold smile grew within me, crawling from my throat to my lips, as if Robert himself stood beside me and whispered, "Show the children that their mother is not weak." I was no longer the abandoned mother in the living room. I was no longer the trembling woman standing by the phone. I am Antonia, the mother who knows everything, who sees through every lie, and who now has the power to turn everything upside down. The first thought that flashed through me was of Angela. She had mocked me, treated me like a ghost, sold off things that belonged to me without a second thought. Edward, the son I once took pride in, was no better, standing beside his sister, helping dismantle what I had built. But now I held something they had never suspected, all the power, all the assets, all the decision-making authority. I could take back each thing, and beyond that, I could make them pay for their arrogance, their deceit, for their foolish pride. I did not hurry. I set the papers on the desk, studying each figure, each company name, each address, and in my mind the steps of revenge began to organize themselves like a strategic map. I would not make a scene, would not shout, would not accuse. I would let them impale themselves on the trap I quietly set, and one by one the assets they sold would return to me. Each recovery would be a delicately aimed blow, forcing them to understand that the person they despised was the only one who truly held power.
I looked out the window where the sea breeze still blew, bringing the scent of salt and old memories. What seemed like loss had become a tacit contract between past and present, between Robert and me, between a mother and children who were too confident that they had won. And in that instant, I felt my strength rise, powerful, cold, but utterly justified. I would not only reclaim what was stolen, I would teach Angela and Edward a lesson they would never forget. The envelope in my hand was not merely paperwork. It was the key to power, the weapon of revenge, a warning. Never underestimate a mother you once thought weak. And I, Antonia, the mother who seemed abandoned, have now awakened, ready to enter a game that both Angela and Edward will regret having provoked.
As the last sheets of paper lay on the desk, the sunset cast a thin golden streak across the window pane, and I knew the moment of change had begun. They had believed they had won, that I was nothing more than a pitiful shadow sitting in the living room with wrinkled hands. They could not see the deep ocean beneath that still surface, a place where a single wave could swallow an entire ship. And then, as if issuing an unintentional challenge, Angela and Edward packed their suitcases full of ambition, donned bright travel outfits, laughing and chatting as they boarded a plane to Europe, leaving me behind with the pitying eyes of the entire neighborhood. The neighbors gathered in small clusters, their eyes glinting with curiosity and I knew well, a hint of open contempt. They called me names like the lonely widow, the old woman with no support. They saw the frayed hem of my clothes, my slow steps across the yard, my thinning gray hair.
But they did not see my eyes, where cold, calculating thoughts were intertwined like steel cables. They did not realize they were witnessing a perfect disguise. The outward weakness was only a mask, and behind it, a calculating machine was starting up. As they handed out condolence flyers and whispered behind my back, I continued to smile softly, the fake tone of a lonely mother. I greeted them with gentle words, just as on any other day, but inside, my plan was growing with every breath. I knew that to win this game, I would need time, patience, and the use of their very prejudices against me. The more they underestimated me, the more shielded I became. The more they believed I was easy prey, the more space I had to prepare moves they could never anticipate. In my study, I spent long hours poring over every page Robert had left, my eyes scanning the lines, marking minor items, matching addresses with company names, uncovering contracts hidden beneath layers of legal language. Each detail was a piece of a treasure map, and I began to see the paths back to every asset they had sold. Angela sold the beach house? There was an incomplete clause in the transfer contract they had overlooked. Edward boasted about an investment in Europe? I discovered a loophole that could void the transaction if ownership fraud could be proven. I did not act hastily. I collected, photographed, recorded, and documented every piece of evidence like an archaeologist recovering fragments to restore a lost civilization. At night, when the streetlights cast their glow across the curtains and everything was still, I practiced my voice. I practiced timidity, lowering my gaze, letting people easily place me in their minds. That old woman knows nothing. People would close their eyes to the most obvious signs, and that was my opportunity. I turned my weakness into a weapon. The appearance of frailty made the enemy overconfident. Silence allowed them to plan their next moves, unaware that I was watching every gesture, every call, every email. I used their pity as a cloak for my coming revenge. On some nights, I stood on the balcony, gazing at the horizon where the sea met the sky, recalling Robert, the way he fixed the truck under the sun, the wink he gave when he told me some secrets were only for those patient enough. Now that secret belonged to me. I smelled the salt in the air, heard the waves crash against the shore like the drums of war. I began contacting those who could help. Legal experts, former asset managers, brokers Robert had trusted. I did not boast.
I simply arranged discreet meetings, sent ordinary-looking emails, read contracts like a word-hungry scholar. Each encounter was meticulously planned. I brought lists of questions, hypothetical scenarios, escape routes for every risk.
At the same time, I sowed a silent doubt in Angela and Edward. I posted meaningless statuses on social media, a photo of an old teacup, a nostalgic story from the past. I did not confront them directly. I let them see that I was still alive, that I remembered, and that I had not forgotten. Sometimes, they responded with cheerful messages, confidently boasting about their trip. At those moments, I merely murmured, imagining the day I would turn everything upside down, paper by paper, number by number, like a coldly beautiful performance. My plan was not just about reclaiming assets. It was a mirror for my two children to see themselves, greedy, proud, ungrateful. I wanted them to understand that love can sustain a person, but power forces responsibility. They had chosen the easy path, money over mother, and now, while they enjoyed European wine, I would activate every legal mechanism, every business tactic, every secret call. Every step I took would be calculated to make them collapse slowly, feeling each layer of regret like a slow, deep cut. And when they thought they had won, the sea remained, silent and cold, holding a power they had never understood. I would show them, never underestimate a mother. Never think a heart capable of love exists only for mercy. It can also play a ruthlessly precise game of chess when necessary. I embraced the role of the abandoned old woman, using society's pity, and from that fragile shell, I would deliver a strike Angela and Edward would never forget. And when they thought they had won, when their laughter still echoed in the airport and the bright photos of Europe stayed pinned on social media, I began to probe the dark corners of their lives, where every ambition, every lie, and every debt revealed itself like cracks in a decorative wall. I no longer acted from emotion. I acted like a cold investigator. A mother's heart still beat within me, but reason had replaced the pain. I dragged the old table closer, opened the file box Robert had left, my hands trembling but steady. I printed every contract page, enlarged the figures, compared every signature. Each document was a clue. Each clue led me to a larger picture of the life Angela and Edward had deliberately concealed. They had erected a facade of glamour. Check-in photos at Paris cafes, candlelit dinners in Rome, sweet golden words when they called home. But behind those images were unpaid bills, loans with crippling interest, and vaguely defined investment contracts signed in haste. I started with the banks, not by storming into trading floors, but by following the clever routes Robert had hinted at: account codes, shell company names, authorized signatories listed at addresses they believed I would never discover. I sent formal inquiries through legal channels, and each stamped reply returned, revealing what I needed: mortgages, volatile cash flows, payments routed to a brokerage located overseas. The deeper I dug, the clearer it became. Angela had used family memory and her mother's weakness as a shield to hide an expanding greed. Edward had masked his make-believe zeal to conceal his short-sightedness. I hired people to quietly call the offices they once bragged about, posing as interested clients, and I listened. Casual remarks slipped out. That company is unstable. That contract needs reviewing. That developer is awaiting cash. I read their old social posts, combed through comments, traced links to reckless brokers and to people willing to sign papers without asking questions. I uncovered rushed transactions, omitted clauses, and contracts showing signs of fraud, enough to reverse transfers if proven systematically. Once, I visited the building manager of the small flat Angela had rented before leaving. I knocked, smiled, and told a simple story. I'm checking on my daughter because she forgets bills. No one questions a worried old mother, and that very lack of suspicion let me hear the truth. Unpaid utilities, a terminated lease, and a letter from a creditor warning of an overdue commercial loan. Each scrap of information became another brick laid on the strategic map in my mind. I also tracked account movements, not through exotic hacks, but by collecting public records, statements, and filings in corporate registries. A pattern emerged. Money flowed out through channels that looked professional, but were actually upgrade companies they created. Profits siphoned into vague management fees. I found the beach house transfer Angela signed, a small clause allowing the buyer to withdraw if full payment wasn't made within 30 days. Yet Angela accepted funds before the buyer completed the process. A procedural error big enough to void the sale if the transfer process's shortcomings were proven. Feelings rose. Anger, hurt, but they did not blur my vision. I made a list of what I needed to prove: signatures, bank receipts, intermediary testimonies, and exchanged emails.
I began calling people Robert had once worked with. Some were cautious, some curious, but a few answered and revealed critical details: haste, opacity, transfers through intermediaries without clear legal paperwork. Then I found the worst part: the debts Angela and Edward had incurred based on assets they believed belonged to them. They had mortgaged and pledged these assets, borrowing against properties they assumed they owned, unaware that the true owner, according to the contracts, was me. They had used my assets as collateral and handed them to profit hunters. It was a reckless gamble, and now I held the key to win that game: prove the true ownership, overturn the transfers, and let the legal consequences fall upon them. But I did not want a public brawl. I wanted them to collapse by their own misplaced confidence. I recorded calls, copied emails, saved every receipt, and began building an airtight dossier. I contacted discreet legal experts, not to shout, but to learn the legal vulnerabilities I could exploit. I learned to read contract clauses as if reading a book, to understand legal language well enough to spot its weaknesses and strengths. Each time I found an error, I smiled quietly. Each hidden debt I discovered made power rise in me. I watched them on social media, the dinners, the smiles, and saw how fragile those masks were. They had sold my beach house. They believed they had succeeded. They had forgotten that the house was registered to another owner. They had forgotten there were people who did not judge by appearances. I knew the road ahead would not be easy. Revenge was not only reclaiming assets, it was the process of peeling back layer after layer of lies and excuses until the truth stood bare before them. I prepared each step, each piece of evidence, each witness, and when the time was ripe, I would let the law and conscience do the rest. Meanwhile, I kept wearing the face of the weak mother, smiling when neighbors pitied me, making tea every morning, sitting and watching the sea. They saw that and grew smug, complacent. They did not know that beneath that calm exterior, I was weaving a web of evidence, of plans, of iron resolve, so that Angela and Edward would understand that the mother they abandoned was not a pauper, but someone capable of overturning the entire world they had built on a foundation of deceit. When the final pieces of the dossier had been set in place, when I could see clearly the threads linking contracts, loans, and hidden invoices, a feeling passed through me that was both cool and gentle, as if all the suffering I had endured could now be converted into something concrete and tangible: power. I knew I could not walk into this legal battle alone. I needed someone who understood the law, who understood money, and, more importantly, who was discreet enough to help me weave a net to trap those who had betrayed me. That was when I called Mr. Peterson. I met him on a light, rainy morning. His office was not polished. A wooden desk with a brown patina, shelves full of file binders,
a few faded paintings hanging quietly. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his salt and pepper hair neatly combed. His eyes looked tired, but were sharp as knives.
When he shook my hand, he did not say much, only a probing little question. "What do you want, Antonia?" He said my name as if he had been waiting for this moment for a long time. I answered with the calm I had honed over many nights. I want to take back what is mine, and I want those who think they have won to realize they were wrong. He raised one corner of his mouth as if he understood the depth of my words and invited me to sit. Mr. Peterson was more than a lawyer. He had worked with Robert and knew the quiet investments and shell companies. Robert had left a few small clues in the envelope, an old address, a phone number, and those threads led Mr. Peterson to me. He opened the file he had brought and laid it on the table. Extracts of property registrations, minutes of board meetings, tax declarations, money transfer receipts. Each page he emphasized with a finger, analyzing every loose spot, every omission that we might legally exploit. "Not loudly," he said. "The law is a double-edged sword. If we make noise, they will shore up their evidence. If we are silent, we can place legal anchors, freezes, claims, verifications of signatures that prevent them from erasing traces." I nodded. I had chosen this path, silence like a shell, waiting for the right moment. Our strategy was as meticulous as sewing. Examine land registers thoroughly. Request copies of minute books for companies in which Robert held stakes. Trace the chain of transfers and, most importantly, file civil injunctions where necessary to block further conveyances. Mr. Peterson explained in a gentle but firm voice, "We have legal bases. There are contract clauses unfulfilled, signatures that are suspicious, haste in procedure. If we can show defects or fraud, the transactions can be voided. And furthermore, we can ask the court for temporary restraining orders to preserve the status quo." Hearing him, I felt each knot inside me loosen. Not because I relished revenge, but because someone stood with me, turning pain into a tool. I was no longer the abandoned mother. I was someone who grasped legal levers, someone who knew how to hide in silence and wait for the strike. But the most important thing Mr. Peterson reminded me was secrecy. "Let them think they have won," he said. "They will reveal flaws when they relax. We will act when the evidence has ripened." I remembered the neighbors' glances, Angela's smug smiles on social media, and understood that their arrogance was their own knife. I agreed. No public words, no hasty moves. Everything would unfold in legal darkness, step by step. Mr. Peterson began handling quiet procedures, orders to verify ownership, legal requests for bank statements, checks with the corporate registry to audit filings. Each call, each email was stamped discreetly. At times, my heart seemed to skip when he mentioned the possibility of calling a former broker, someone who might testify that a deal was coerced, or finding a faded signature on the beach house contract. Those possibilities made me both tense and hopeful. Secrecy was not only a legal strategy, it protected me from emotional outbursts. If Angela or Edward sensed I knew, they would bunker down. If the neighbors saw me awaken, the whole neighborhood's attitude would change and my plan would unravel. So I lived a double life. By day, I remained Antonia, the frail woman, brewing tea, smiling at passers-by. By night, I sat with Mr. Peterson, reading contract clauses by the desk lamp, listing witnesses, preparing discreet petitions. There were moments when my chest ached. I thought of Robert, of the smile he wore when he slipped the envelope into the drawer, as if he had known I would one day need it. I wondered whether revenge was the only way to make the two children understand. But then I recalled Angela's cold laughter when she listed my house for sale, and Edward's self-satisfied look bragging about investments overseas. Their betrayal was not only material loss, it was a wound driven into dignity. And so I resolved to keep everything secret. Waiting became a weapon, silence became a tactic. Step by step,
scenario by scenario, legal orders were placed like pieces on a chessboard. When the time came, I would press the button, quietly, without flourish, a precise blow that would make the whole system collapse, and make Angela and Edward realize they had crossed a woman who knew not only how to love, but how to fight. I left Mr. Peterson's office in the late afternoon as the rain drizzled. On the way home, I looked up at the gray sky and felt each raindrop like a promise. This silence would be repaid with a fitting end.
And I prepared, patient, cold, and uncompromising, waiting for the right moment, when all evidence had ripened, to give the betrayers exactly what they deserved. When I left Mr. Peterson's office, the rain was still falling in a fine mist, and everything felt as if it had been draped in a thicker layer of silence. Silence was not emptiness. It was the shelter for a new person taking shape. The next morning, I stepped out onto the street wearing my old coat, my hair bundled awkwardly, a light smile the neighbors expected from a widow. They looked at me with pity, asked perfunctory questions, poured me half a cup of tea, and then turned away to continue their lives. They saw Antonia, the small, vulnerable mother. They did not see Antonia behind closed doors. That woman was in a black suit, seated at the old wooden desk with a thick file before her, the desk lamp throwing cold letters into sharp relief. By day, I was the perfect act. I slowed my steps, spoke softly, folded my hands as though always worried. I let the doorbell ring a few times before answering. I let conversation stall at, "Oh, are you all right?" To which I replied with an ambiguous smile and a nod. Everyone felt comfortable with that image. They forgot to ask what I was reading. They forgot to look into eyes in which threads were being woven into a plan. That feigned frailty was the most effective armor. It concealed alertness. It hid the power accumulating behind an ordinary sigh. And when night fell, I changed. I locked the door, drew the curtains, let the darkness wrap the room, and switched on the desk lamp. A narrow pool of yellow light, enough to focus on each letter. I opened my laptop, logged into business email, and the tapping of keys became the footsteps of a commander. I called Mr. Peterson, speaking in legal terms that once sounded like a foreign tongue, but were now engraved into my palms. I contacted former asset managers, fund representatives, signed copies of agreements, answered emails with a calm but decisive tone. Numbers, account codes, clauses that had been lifeless pieces of paper came alive under my hands, and I steered them. I learned to negotiate as one learns a dance, when to push, when to step back, when to soften to extract information, when to drop a line that would unnerve the other side. Sometimes I borrowed Robert's voice in my head, calm, cautious, always thinking 3 steps ahead. I read contracts at night as one reads a suspense novel, hunting for the hinge, for the impact point. I signed powers of attorney, opened buffer accounts, moved small amounts to avoid suspicion, placed discreet legal holds. Every action was planned. Every step had a reason. Nothing was spontaneous. I hired a single secretary through Mr. Peterson's recommendation, a young woman, discreet and in every sense, knowing nothing. She handled file transfers, printed statements, arranged appointments. I set passwords, changed the phone number used for transactions, created several anonymous email accounts to contact former buyers. I did not want traces, so all communication was encrypted in ways known only to Mr. Peterson and me. Sometimes, I went to banks, sat in the waiting room looking awkward, and while they presumed I was an old woman withdrawing a little pension, I secretly watched staff expressions, read attitudes, remembered names of potential allies or adversaries. The power I held was not grand in the ostentatious sense of flaunted wealth. It was a network of small details, the ability to delay a transaction, a careless clerk at a company sending a receipt to the wrong address, a copy of an email left on a broker's computer. I assembled those scattered pieces into a solid mechanism. Every night was a rehearsal. I tested scenarios, calculated responses, prepared countermeasures for every possible situation.
Sometimes I stayed awake until dawn, eyes blurred from fatigue but full of resolve. I thought of Robert, of the look he had when he slipped the envelope into the drawer, as if he were safeguarding a secret for the day of reckoning. But my revenge was not merely punishment, it was a lesson. I wanted Angela to understand that money is not everything. I wanted her to see that ingratitude comes with a price. I wanted Edward to realize that pride can lead to the edge of a cliff. So I layered my plan. First, freeze the assets. Then, make the loans difficult to service. And when the moment ripened, hold them accountable, legally, financially, and sometimes socially. I pictured them standing in court under the suspicious gaze of friends, amid neighbors' whispers. And in that vision, I was both the instigator and the teacher.
There were nights when the ache of missing my children surged. I looked at an old family photo on the shelf. Robert smiling at the corner of the frame, Angela small, Edward innocent, and asked myself, am I being too cruel? But then I remembered Angela's cold laughter when she announced the sale of my house, Edward's self-satisfied gaze boasting of fake achievements. A mother's love would not let me bow to betrayal. That love turned into a bounded power, not to utterly destroy, but to awaken, to make them pay for what they had done, and, if they chose, to learn anew. The next morning I once again donned the thin shroud of a widow, brewed tea, and smiled at the neighbors. They still called me names full of pity, still offered words of comfort. They did not realize that the night before I had filed a legal notice to halt a transaction, that I had signed authorization with a bank to trace the chain of payments, that several assets were quietly being pulled back toward me.
They did not see the numbers in motion, did not hear the silent rustle of paperwork shifting, and because of that, my plan remained secure. I lived two lives. By day, a pitiable old woman. By night, a woman of power. Each role required finesse. Each action required calculation. Inside me, the flame of revenge burned low, not wild, not hasty, but quietly, persistently. Like waves against rock, wearing away until the crack opened and the boulder toppled. When that moment came, Antonia would no longer be the fading shadow on the salon chair. She would be the keeper of the ledgers, the final signature, and the teacher of an unforgettable lesson for the children who chose money over their mother. After many weeks of quietly managing transactions, controlling assets, and coordinating with Mr. Peterson, I felt the need to return to a place. The place that held our happy memories, where the family's laughter once echoed, where every footprint of Robert, Angela, and Edward had been imprinted. I knew that the path of revenge was not only numbers, contracts, and legal orders, it was also confronting the past, facing the emotions that once made me weak. So, on a gloomy afternoon, I drove along the coastal road, watching the waves break against the shore as if reminding me of those distant moments. The beach house, where Robert and I had painted every wall, and where Angela had once chased a little dog laughing, stood there in the late light, quiet and empty. The moment I stepped through the gate, I felt a different air. The house now belonged to new owners, but every plank, every brick, every railing still soaked in memory. I walked slowly through the living room and touched the old sofa where Robert used to sit and read the paper every morning. The old scent lingered, mingled with the briny breeze. My heart sank, but only for a moment. Bitterness rose immediately when I heard again what Angela had told the buyer. This house. I'm worried Mom won't understand, but I need the money. I need freedom. And my mother, she doesn't matter anymore. Those words cut into my heart like a knife. I felt the weight of betrayal, but not the kind of helpless pain.
it ignited a different flame: resolve. The beautiful memories now served as proof of my ownership, that I had built this place with my life, with sweat, tears, and love. Angela had thought she could exploit my weakness, but she was wrong. The betrayal only sharpened me, made me more alert, turned pain into the drive to craft the perfect plan. I moved through the house, silently observing every corner, every door, every wall the new owners had touched.
I noted every detail. The old dining set still in its place, the floral rug Robert used to spread under Angela's feet when she played, and the scratches on the railing, evidence of the brilliant summers that had passed. Everything reminded me of responsibility, not only to memory, but to the rights that were truly mine. I understood that revenge was not just about reclaiming money or property. It was a moment of affirmation. No one could trample on a mother's sacrifices without paying the price. Sitting on the step, I closed my eyes, inhaled the salty sea air, and pictured the next phase of the plan. I would not merely retrieve the beach house. I would make Angela and Edward realize that their actions had been watched, analyzed, and would face consequences. Each fake contract, each lie to a buyer, every smug smile, all would become pieces in the educational revenge mosaic I was assembling. When I opened my eyes, I noticed the waves striking the shore, as if reminding me, things may rise and fall, but patience and strategy endure. I walked around the yard, ran my hand along the walls, and felt Robert's presence in every detail. He seemed to whisper to me, "You have the key, Antonia. At the right moment, everything will return to you." And so I stood there, both the frail mother the neighbors pitied, and Antonia, the powerful woman holding both the legal keys and a perfect plan of revenge. I knew Angela thought this old mother had nothing left but suffering, but they did not know I was ready. I was prepared, and this beach house testified that power is not always ostentatious. Sometimes it is quiet, subtle, and it is in that silence that revenge ripens most fully. My footsteps left the beach house in silence. No one watched, but each grain of sand, each wall, each object bore witness to a mother awakened, resolute, and ready to turn the pain of betrayal into justice. I left, but in my heart the house still echoed with old laughter, mingling with the approaching sound of a perfect plan. A plan that would teach Angela and Edward an unforgettable lesson. Never underestimate the mother who built everything with her own hands. After weeks of quietly managing transactions, controlling assets, and coordinating with Mr. Peterson, I felt the need to return to one place. The place that held happy memories, where the family's laughter once echoed, where every footprint of Robert, Angela, and Edward had been imprinted. I knew that the path of revenge was not solely numbers, contracts, and legal orders. It required confronting the past, facing the emotions that once made me vulnerable. So on a bleak afternoon, I drove along the coastal road, watching the waves beat against the shore, as if reminding me of those distant moments. The beach house, where Robert and I had painted every wall and where Angela had once chased a little dog while laughing, stood there in the late light, quiet and deserted. The moment I stepped through the gate, I felt a different atmosphere. The house now belonged to new owners, but every plank, every brick, every railing was still saturated with memory. I moved slowly through the living room and touched the old sofa where Robert used to sit reading the paper every morning. The old scent lingered, mingled with the salty sea air. My heart sank, but only briefly. Bitterness rose immediately when I heard again what Angela had told the buyer. "This house, I'm worried Mom won't understand, but I need the money. I need freedom. And my mother, she doesn't matter anymore." Those words cut into my heart like a knife. I felt the weight of betrayal, but not helpless pain.
It ignited a different flame. Resolve. The beautiful memories now served as proof of my ownership, that I had built this place with my life, with sweat, tears, and love. Angela had thought she could exploit my weakness, but she was wrong. The betrayal only sharpened me, made me more alert, turned pain into the drive to craft a perfect plan. I walked through the house, silently observing every corner, every door, every wall the new owners had touched. I noted every detail. The old dining set still in its place, the floral rug Robert used to spread under Angela's feet when she played, and the scratches on the railing, evidence of brilliant summers gone by. Everything reminded me of responsibility, not only to memory, but to the rights that were truly mine. I realized that revenge was not just about reclaiming money or property. It was a moment of affirmation. No one could trample on a mother's sacrifices without paying the price. Sitting on the steps, I closed my eyes, inhaled the salty air, and pictured the next phase of the plan. I would not merely retrieve the beach house. I would make Angela and Edward understand that their actions had been watched, analyzed, and would face consequences. Every fake contract, every lie to a buyer, every smug smile, all would become pieces in the educational revenge mosaic I was assembling.
When I opened my eyes, I noticed the waves hitting the shore as if reminding me, things may rise and fall, but patience and strategy endure. I walked the yard, ran my hand along the walls, and felt Robert's presence in every detail. He seemed to whisper to me, "You have the key, Antonia. At the right moment, everything will return to you." So I stood there, both the frail mother the neighbors pitied, and Antonia, the powerful woman holding the legal keys and a flawless plan of revenge. I knew Angela thought this old mother had nothing left but suffering, but they did not know I was ready. I was prepared, and this beach house testified that power is not always ostentatious. Sometimes it is quiet, subtle, and it is in that silence that revenge ripens most fully. My footsteps left the beach house in silence. No one watched, but each grain of sand, each wall, each object bore witness to a mother awakened, resolute, and ready to turn the pain of betrayal into justice. I left, but in my heart the house still echoed with old laughter, mingling with the approaching sound of a perfect plan. A plan that would teach Angela and Edward an unforgettable lesson. Never underestimate the mother who built everything with her own hands. After the beach house and Robert's truck were returned to my control, a strange calm washed over me. But I knew this was only the opening act. The material things returned to me were not the end. They were a signal of a sequence of events waiting to unfold. I felt in my bones that Angela and Edward, who had once walked confidently along paths paved with scheming and ambition, were now standing on an edge they did not even see. I did not rush to strike, nor did I rush to reveal my strength. I let time do its work, let the truth surface slowly, let their missteps become the perfect instruments for the revenge I had been nurturing. Just weeks later, the updates from Mr. Peterson began to arrive in small, precise pieces, like fragments being set into place. Angela, with the confidence that had once infuriated me, began to face heavy losses in the investments she had called golden opportunities. Complex contracts, investment partners turning from allies into claimants, and mounting debts began to crush the girl who had once mocked her mother. Edward did not stand still either. He lied, attempted to conceal the losses, but his deceit only drove them deeper into the whirlpool of trouble. Each time Angela messaged me pleading, "Mom, please help me," I only smiled. I had prepared for this moment. The moment they would realize that the person they had long underestimated was the one holding the real power. Edward grew increasingly aggressive, blaming everything around him, the market, friends, even me, even the world, as if no one else bore responsibility. I listened to their calls, to the blaming words, to the pleas, and inside me there was a strange serenity. I observed, I memorized, and I pictured how every lie, every misstep would return like a slow but certain blade, cutting into their pride.
I knew Angela would panic. I knew Edward would rage, but I also knew they needed to face consequences themselves. And that was the greatest lesson they had to learn. I watched quietly from a distance. In the first days, Angela phoned home, her voice trembling, asking me about financial procedures, begging for help. But I did not respond immediately. I let her seek a way out on her own. Let mistakes reveal themselves and topple the false confidence she once had. I watched Edward try every trick to hide failure, yet each lie tightened the noose around them. Helplessness, anxiety, and panic gradually appeared on the faces of the two children I had nurtured. With each failure, I felt a quiet joy. Not selfish pleasure, but the satisfaction of a justice being carried out in its own peculiar way. I looked at the numbers, the contracts, and the investment reports, like a commander studying a battle map. I saw their steps, the errors they made, and the chances for them to understand that no one could despise their mother without paying the price. On long nights, sitting in my study while the yellow lamplight fell across the files, I noted every detail. Where Angela failed, how Edward lied, how they shifted blame and sought escape. All of it was living evidence of the composure and power I had amassed. I knew that each small wrong step they took, each mounting debt, each broken relationship, all contributed to the revenge score I was composing, a composition meant to make them realize that Antonia, the mother once deemed weak, was now the holder of full authority, the designer of every piece of their life's puzzle. I stood on the balcony looking out to the distant sea and took a deep breath. The waves hit the shore, reminding me that time is an ally. Everything was unfolding according to plan. Angela and Edward were pushing themselves deeper into the vortex, and I, as mother, protector, and planner, would witness every drop of sweat, every tear they would pay for their ingratitude and deceit. They had thought they had won, that I was nothing more than a shadow on the doorstep. But now, as losses piled up, as debts tightened like bindings, as Edward hurled blame at me and the world, they would realize that Antonia was never someone easily defeated. I had been silent, I had observed, and I had prepared. Their world was shaking, and I, that mother they had thought weak, was the wave no one had anticipated. Powerful, cold, and entirely resolute. After watching Angela and Edward gradually spiral into trouble, losses, and mounting debts, I knew it was time to take the next step in the plan I had long nurtured. Their mistakes, their lies, and their arrogance had paved the way for quiet justice to arrive. I did not need to shout or apply pressure. My power came from patience, from waiting for the moment when they would expose everything themselves. And that moment had come. I sat in my study, the warm lamplight falling across the stacks of files and the contracts that Mr. Peterson and I had prepared. On the desk lay a letter, not a lawsuit, not a warning, but an eviction notice, a cold, direct, and indisputable tool. I put my pen down and looked at the words, solemn and measured, as if I were closing a door on the past and asserting present and future authority. I knew Angela would feel its force immediately, but what satisfied me most was this: she would have no chance to excuse or deceive. When the letter reached Angela, I pictured the moment she opened the envelope. Bewildered eyes, a racing heart, the slow strangling of a once confident assurance. The apartment she had assumed was hers, where she once strode proudly, would become the emblem of a harsh truth. The true power had never left my hands. I sensed the tremor in every detail, the light from the window reflecting on the walls. The keepsake she had once treasured, now only evidence of my restored sovereignty. Edward, who had lied and blamed me and the world, would also come to understand that the game was over. I did not need to explain, to defend.
This simple, cold, and careful action contained its own force. I had once been the weak mother. Now I was the powerful woman controlling the fate of the children I had raised, and simultaneously, the architect of a perfect revenge.
The instant Angela realized she had been evicted, I knew that every smug smile, every lie, every deceit she had used on me and those around her was turning back upon her, forming a vivid lesson about the consequences of ingratitude and blind ambition. I stood silently by the window, imagining her frantic attempts to resist, to flee, but all would be in vain. Every route had been calculated by me. Looking back, I remembered the days I had bowed and endured, the silent tears shed at betrayal. But now, peace and power filled my mind. I had proven that the mother they thought weak could become a silent storm, capable of dismantling false confidence and restoring justice. Each step Angela and Edward took now lay within my control, and I, Antonia, was the director of the whole game. The eviction notice was not merely a legal sheet of paper. It symbolized awakening, reclaimed authority, and an unforgettable lesson that the love, sacrifice, and patience of a mother cannot be exploited with impunity. And in that moment I smiled and exhaled, knowing that power had returned to my hands, and Angela, the daughter who had scorned me, would face the truth unrelentingly, learning that everyone must pay for their ingratitude. Pieces were returning, lessons being written through actions, and my heartbeat matched the rhythm of quiet justice, slow, certain, and irresistible. I had become the mother no one dared to underestimate, and that eviction letter was only the beginning of the subtle revenge I would perfect in the steps ahead. The eviction notice made the first sound, not loud, not dramatic, merely an invisible compression of pressure that rocked their pride. I left my study after sending the letter, sitting alone with a cup of cold tea, feeling the strange serenity of someone who has completed a necessary task. I knew there would be a reaction after that eviction, and the reaction came, but not in the way I expected. One afternoon, while European sunlight still glowed on Angela's phone screen, the call came. Mom, please listen to me." Her voice trembled, every syllable heavy with anxiety. The background was full of waves, the hum of traffic, the long sigh of a foreign city. "Everything is collapsing. We need money. Please help us this once, okay?" I looked at the screen and saw her name, Angela, and a flood of memories returned. Embraces, baked treats, nights I stayed up reading stories when she was small. The mother-child bond tightened like a cord. My heart stung. But what she needed now was not an embrace. It was responsibility for the choices she had made. She spoke quickly, in broken sentences. Failure at a small fund, a real estate project in Italy bleeding money, creditors calling like a hive disturbed. Edward texted after, blaming, excusing, promising to make things right, promising to fix everything. But their voices betrayed a panic no money could hide. I had spent many nights wrestling with this path before stepping into it. I had weighed every option to avoid turning revenge into senseless torment. And now, as they stood at the abyss of their own making, I remained silent. Not from cruelty, but so the lesson could be learned on its own. "Mom, I know you're hurt," Angela said, trying to cling to that old sense of safety. "Please, Mom, just this once." I looked out the window where the sky was darkening and saw my silhouette framed against distant restaurant lights. I thought of Robert, how he taught me to be clear-headed, to preserve dignity. I remembered his whisper on a rainy night, "You can't always save them. Sometimes you must let them bear the consequences." Those words now echoed in me like a cold directive. I did not hang up immediately. I let that trembling voice continue, letting Angela display her panic and the half-confessions she tried to avoid. In her pleas, beneath the begging, I heard a faint note of self-reproach, too small, like a tiny flame in a rainy night. I thought of mornings when she told friends her mother couldn't understand the times, of the bitter smile when she boasted about selling the beach house, of the eyes without a trace of remorse. Now she was calling, begging for rescue, like a child running back when a game breaks. For the first time in my life, I did not rush. I did not pack, did not book a flight, did not wire money overnight. I held my silence as part of the discipline required.
A mother's heart still loves, but that love does not mean carrying every mistake.
I chose to hold power to teach, not to be a slave to ingratitude. Any money given now would only cover a wound temporarily. It would not cure their dependency and lack of responsibility. I wanted them to learn to face consequences, through fear, through loss, through the slow unweaving of the ropes they themselves had knotted. "I hear you," I said slowly, my voice calm like the still bottom of a lake. "You made your choices. I have given you many chances to grow." I did not shout or judge loudly. My words carried the weight of what had been betrayed, but also left a space in which they could enter and see themselves. "You must take responsibility for your choices, Angela. If you need specific advice, call, and I will show you the way. But I will not pay your debts. I will not hide the consequences of your actions any longer." There was a long silence. In Angela's breath, I heard regret bubble up, fragile, ready to break. "Mom, I understand. I will try." Then she cried, not only for money, but for realizing her armor had cracked, for realizing she lost something more priceless than a house, her mother's trust. I felt it like a blade across my heart, but not the kind that sent me into frenzied revenge. It was the blade that carved out the lesson. I hung up as the call faded. I did not feel victorious, nor defeated. I felt relieved, because finally they faced the truth. My revenge was not about utterly destroying them, but about teaching them to stand on their own feet, to make a mother's love the foundation for responsibility, not a doormat for every mistake. In the dark, I made a cup of tea, set it on the table, and stared at the sea, where everything began and where everything will end, in the way justice, sometimes cold, still fulfills its duty. After the trembling call from Europe, I knew the lesson had begun. Angela would no longer have an easy way back. No more pleading to cover up her mistakes. She had seen the consequences of the choices she once dismissed. But now, as her fears became solid and undeniable, she would have to confront a reality she had never imagined. I felt the shift in the air. Every step she took, every anxious heartbeat was being observed by a mother who had learned how to be cold, yet powerful. When Angela returned home, I had prepared everything. The apartment she once entered with a proud smile was now locked tight. The mailbox was empty, the key turned silently on the doorknob, as if announcing that ownership now completely belonged to me. I knew she would knock, would beg, would use every argument to prove she deserved to come back. But now there was nothing left to justify. Each step she took down the once familiar hallway echoed with the hollow sound of disappointment. She was no longer the owner she believed herself to be. The bank account Angela and Edward once manipulated with confidence, where she believed money would solve everything, was now fully closed. Every number, every transaction, every financial plan was beyond her control. I had let it all collapse so she would learn that true power was not money or schemes, but the silent understanding and patience of the mother she underestimated. Edward, the man who lied and abandoned her when things turned difficult.
He was gone. Angela now had to stand alone, facing the truth she never imagined. The one she belittled, the one she thought weak, was the person who held the greatest power in her life. From a distance, I observed every reaction. Angela walked around the apartment, her hand brushing the walls that once belonged to her, but everything felt meaningless now.
Panic was etched across her face, her eyes wide, her lips trembling without sound. I could feel her heartbeat racing. I could hear it in my mind like a drum, warning that her realization had finally arrived. She understood. There was no Edward to lean on, no fake friends, no fake confidence. Only me. The mother who had stayed silent for so long, yet whose power now stood unmistakably clear. Angela looked around, touching familiar objects, searching for an escape, but everything had been arranged precisely. Every document, every asset, every connection around her was tightly controlled by me. She realized that everything she once thought came easily was now fully under my command. There was no loud explosion, only a deep realization of the power she had never noticed. The mother she thought weak, the mother who endured in silence, had become a quiet storm, stronger and colder than anyone could have imagined.
I watched her stand there, her silhouette trembling in the dim light, and felt a deep, silent satisfaction. Not a gloating joy, but the calm of a mother who knows the final lesson is beginning. Angela would have to carry the consequences, would have to learn that the world does not allow dependency or deception without a price. Every unsteady step she took, every sigh, every disappointed glance was proof that I had been right. True power belongs to the one they never respected. In that quiet moment, I breathed softly, looking out the window where the late sunlight filtered through the leaves. The distant sea waves reminded me that everything had returned to its rightful place. What was lost had been reclaimed. What they believed secure now trembled, and I, Antonia, stood at the center of it all, controlling every breath, every step, every lesson they were forced to learn.
Angela, the once proud daughter, now had to face a great truth. The mother she had underestimated for so long was the one who held absolute power, and that every action always demands a consequence, one that cannot be escaped. When Angela stood before the empty apartment, her eyes red and her lips trembling, I saw the disillusionment etched into every gesture she made. No more keys, no more accounts. Edward had vanished, leaving behind nothing but emptiness and responsibilities she had never prepared to face. She was like a bird trapped in a cage of her own making, forced now to look into the vastness she once mistook for freedom, without ever understanding what true power meant. I stood quietly in the shadows of the room across from her, watching her uncertain steps move through the place that had once been hers, listening to the echo of her footsteps against the wooden floor. And I knew this moment would become a turning point in her life, the moment she finally faced a truth she could no longer deny. "Mom, I just wanted to be free," she cried out, her voice breaking like a child lost in a storm. "We just wanted a new chance, to live without being tied down, to start again." Those words, echoing in the apartment that once symbolized pride and belonging, became painfully raw and tragic. I felt the fear and despair behind them, but I did not waver. My mother's heart still loved her, but my mind, sharpened through years of betrayal, knew that love did not mean rescuing every mistake. I stepped out from the darkness, my voice calm yet weighted. "You wanted freedom? Now you have it. But freedom does not give you the right to be cruel." Each word fell slowly, like sealing the final door to the years she had taken for granted. I looked directly into Angela's eyes, saw disappointment tangled with regret, and knew she was finally realizing the freedom she dreamed of was not something earned by stepping on others, not something built through deception or exploitation. She sank to her knees, her trembling hands covering her face as sobs filled the room. The excuses she once believed in, the justification she repeated so confidently, now scattered like dust in the wind, impossible to hold, impossible to defend. Angela saw every decision clearly now. Every lie, every moment she placed herself at the center of the world had led to the chaos she was now forced to carry. I watched her fall into the whirlpool of consequences she had created, and I felt the silent satisfaction of a mother who had endured. Justice does not need to shout. It arrives in the quiet realization of the one who underestimated it. I remember the old days, when she was still a child, when I taught her that freedom must come with responsibility, that new chances are not meant to deceive or abandon what was built with effort and love. Now, in the fading afternoon light, those lessons resurfaced, not through words, but through the steady actions I had taken.
Angela would have to learn how to stand on her own, to understand that power is not the right to take from others, but the strength to control oneself and accept the consequences of every action. Her head bowed, sobbing. And I knew that within that collapse, an important lesson was forming. Freedom is not a gift to be stolen from someone else. It is something earned, preserved, through honesty, humility, and gratitude. I did not go to her. I did not reach out a comforting hand. I stood still, letting her feel the full weight of consequence, letting her understand that the mother she once dismissed as weak was the one who held the greatest power, and that freedom, when used cruelly, brings only loneliness and disappointment. Her sobs echoed through the empty apartment, blending with the slow, steady rhythm of my heartbeat. I realized this moment was not just the end of false pride, but the beginning of a new chapter for both of us, where power, justice, and life lessons would be carved deeply into every glance, every step, every tear. Angela would never forget. The one she underestimated, the one she believed weak, was the one who decided everything. And true freedom never comes from cruelty. After the sobs quieted, after the trembling excuses and Angela's tears faded into silence, I realized the moment for the lesson to be completed had come. I had allowed her to collapse, to face consequences she never imagined, and now it was time to reshape the path she would walk. But on my terms, not hers. My silence was not indifference. It was a part of the power I had spent a lifetime learning to protect. The power to decide, to set boundaries, to make those who once underestimated me recognize the true weight of every action. Angela, I said, my voice calm yet sharp as a blade, if you want to step back into my life, you will not enter empty-handed, with a hollow heart, or with meaningless arrogance. I looked straight into her eyes, saw the turmoil still swirling in them, but now mixed with a faint recognition that nothing would be free anymore, that forgiveness was not an automatic gift, and that her mother, the one she once dismissed, now held absolute authority. I laid down the conditions, each word forged like steel. She had to start over. No shortcuts, no half-truths, no leaning on others to carry her burdens. Every debt would be paid by her own hands, every task carried out by her own effort, every decision weighed, owned, and made with respect for those who once helped her without asking for anything in return. Humility was not humiliation. It was the understanding that the world does not revolve around any one person, and that true maturity arrives only when one knows the value of every action, every word, every choice. Angela looked at me, tension in her eyes, but also the first glimmer of awareness. She listened to every word, every pulse of my voice, feeling the weight of the conditions no one had ever dared impose on her. Not because I wanted to torture her, but because I knew only in this way would she learn what responsibility meant, what justice meant, and what love truly meant when it was stripped of cruelty. I remembered the days she was small, the moments I held her hand to teach her to walk, the times I wiped her tears, the nights I taught her that life was more than what we simply desired. And now,
It was I who delivered the harshest, deepest lessons, with no room for retreat. You will work, pay your debts, live humbly, and show respect. I offer you no other chance beyond these. If you choose to stay, you stay with full responsibility. If not, this door will close forever. I could feel her heartbeat quicken, her breaths coming sharp and fast, like an animal realizing it was standing at the edge of a cliff. I stood still, letting the heavy silence between us become a lesson, a warning, a testament that true power neither shouts nor threatens. It simply exists, and those who face it must learn to respect it or pay the price. The moment stretched for minutes, but within me it felt eternal. I had just set the foundation for transformation while solidifying my own power.
Angela had to understand that every new chance comes with a lesson, every forgiveness with responsibility, and that her mother, once betrayed, once underestimated, now stood as an unshakable pillar of authority, one no one could pass without bowing to this truth. Freedom, opportunity, love, none of them come for free. I saw her standing there, trembling, eyes lowered to the floor, realizing she could no longer continue as before. I felt a quiet satisfaction, not gloating, but the calm certainty of a mother who had learned to turn pain into strength, power into teaching, and love into a tool of wisdom and discipline. Angela now stood before the choice of her life: walk the path I set or lose everything. And I knew for the first time she would learn that all the power she once craved would never compare to the maturity I was offering her. A maturity stern, cold, yet filled with the clarity and love only a mother can give.
After laying down those strict conditions, I waited, quietly observing every step, every glance, every action Angela made. I had hoped that after the tears, after the sobs, after the storm of chaos, when she was forced to face the truth, she would change, that she would finally understand that money is not everything, that power is not a toy meant to manipulate others, and that love, gratitude, and humility are what truly matter. But as days passed, then weeks, then months, I came to accept a painful truth I could no longer deny. Angela did not change. She remained selfish, still tried to bend the rules, still demanded without working, still believed that money could fix everything, and that I would always remain the pillar she could lean on. I stood in the empty room where laughter once echoed, where lies were spoken, where a mother's gentle tears had fallen for her child. Now, only heavy silence remained. I felt each heartbeat like a tolling bell signaling the end of a chapter. And I, Antonia, knew I had to cut this bond to protect myself, to preserve the power, dignity, and peace I had lost for so many years. No dramatic explosions, no loud accusations, only a quiet decisiveness, sharp as a blade I had forged through long years of pain, betrayal, and survival. I called Angela in, looked straight into her eyes filled with pride and trembling fear, and said, "You chose money over me. Now live with that choice." Every word I spoke, every tone, every rhythm landed like nails driven into her conscience. No more forgiveness, no more second chances. I let her carry the full weight of the decision she had so stubbornly made. I saw her eyes flicker, shock, regret, faint like flickering flames, but it was far too late. No pleading gaze, no desperate silence could shake the decision I had reached.
As Angela walked away, I sensed her heartbeat slowing, her body trembling, every step echoing the reminder of a loss she could never reclaim. She had believed she could manipulate me, that I would forever remain her safety net. But now,
All she had left was loneliness and disappointment. I, Antonia, stood there, silent yet powerful, feeling that freedom for both of us came not from clinging, but from daring to let go of what had betrayed me, from standing tall and declaring that love is not blind submission. I remembered the years of raising her, the moments I sacrificed, the tears I wiped away when she was small, the times I guided her first steps with a kind heart. Now I realized the final lesson of my life was not meant for her to understand immediately, but for her to endure the consequences she created. I was no longer the mother who swallowed her pain. I was the awakened mother, the powerful woman, the one who set the final boundaries and upheld them.
This severance was not born from hatred, but from inner strength. I had proven that even betrayed, underestimated, deceived, a mother can rise, reclaim order, protect her dignity and rights, and show her child that every action carries consequences. Angela had chosen her path, the path of money, deceit, and selfishness, and I gave her the freedom she craved, but along with it, the harshest lesson. No one can change if they themselves refuse to. I walked toward the window and looked out to the distant sea. The wind blew strong as if trying to sweep away every painful memory, yet I felt at peace. One chapter ended and another began, where I, Antonia, stand firm, powerful, and free, no longer bound by betrayal or selfishness, and where Angela must learn to live with the choice she made.
In that silence, I felt that for the first time in my life, I was truly free. Free from meaningless sacrifices, free from dependence on someone who never appreciated me, and free to live my life by my own rules.